Hi, my name is Claire. I'm 21 years old, and today I will be sharing a confession I have never told anyone before. But today, I will spill it out so that I can be free again. It all started when my mom got married to Daniel, my 55-year-old stepdad. He was rich, handsome, and had a certain charm that made people gravitate toward him. At first, I thought of him as just another man in my mother's life, a provider, someone to keep her company after years of being alone. But as time went on, things changed. Or maybe I changed. Ensure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any confession. I remember the day that set everything in motion. My mother, Anna, was rushing around the house, stuffing clothes into her suitcase, her phone pressed against her ear as she confirmed last-minute details of her business trip. She had always been busy, always moving, always chasing something: her career, success, stability. I stood in the doorway of her bedroom, watching her, but she barely noticed. "You sure you'll be okay, Claire?" she asked distractedly, zipping up her suitcase. "Yeah, Mom, I'm not a kid," I replied, forcing a smile. Daniel entered the room then, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive watch. He was always put together, always calm and in control, a stark contrast to my mother's hurried, restless energy. "I'll drive you to the airport," he offered. His voice was smooth, reassuring. Anna barely looked up. "Thanks, darling," she murmured, already typing an email on her phone. And then it happened, something so simple, yet so defining. My mother turned to Daniel, kissed him quickly on the lips, and muttered, "See you soon." It was an ordinary goodbye between a husband and wife, yet I felt something shift in me. I looked away, pretending to check my phone, but my hands felt clammy. I didn't understand why it unsettled me. Maybe it was because Daniel had been so present in our lives while my mother was always elsewhere, preoccupied. Maybe it was the way he looked at me sometimes, like I wasn't just a stepdaughter, but something more. Or maybe it was just my own restless emotions, looking for something to cling to. When the front door finally shut behind my mother, the silence was immediate. The house felt different, quieter, heavier, as if something had been left unsaid. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Daniel cleared his throat. "Well, looks like it's just us for the next 2 weeks," he said casually, offering a small smile. I nodded but didn't respond. His presence suddenly felt too large, too noticeable. "Let me know if you need anything," he added before walking toward the kitchen. I didn't move until he was out of sight. Then, without another word, I turned and retreated to my room, closing the door behind me. My heart was racing, and I hated that I didn't know why. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I realized nothing would ever be the same again. Later that evening, Claire and Daniel sat across from each other at the dining table. At first, the conversation was casual. They talked about school, work, and the storm that was supposed to hit later that night. The atmosphere was light, and for the first time since her mother had left, the tension between them seemed to fade. "You know," Claire said, poking at her half-eaten lasagna with a fork, "for a man with such expensive taste, your cooking is seriously terrible." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Excuse me? I worked hard on this masterpiece." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Hard? You pulled it out of the oven and hoped for the best." He smirked, setting down his glass of wine. "Hey, not everyone can be a culinary genius. But you still ate it, so that says something." She laughed, a genuine, warm sound that made Daniel smile. It was easy, too easy, talking to him like this, teasing him as if they were equals rather than stepfather and stepdaughter. A comfortable silence settled between them. The kind that didn't feel like something missing, but rather something understood. Claire glanced at him as he reached for their plates, his movements effortless, familiar. She had never really noticed before how confident he was in the smallest actions, how his presence commanded attention without him even trying. As he cleared the table, she found her gaze lingering a little longer than it should. He caught her staring. "You okay?" he asked, voice softer now. Claire blinked, feeling her cheeks warm. "Yeah," she murmured, suddenly unsure. "Just thinking." Daniel set the dishes in the sink, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel before turning back to face her. His expression had changed, no longer playful, but serious. "Claire," he said slowly, almost hesitantly. She swallowed. "Yeah?" He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw before looking at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "I like you," he admitted. "A lot." Claire felt her breath catch. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. But no, the weight in his voice, the way he was looking at her, it was real. Her pulse quickened. "I don't mean that in the way I should," Daniel continued, stepping closer. "I know this is complicated, but I can't ignore it anymore." Claire's fingers gripped the edge of the table as emotions tangled inside her. She should say something, anything, but words failed her. And then, before she could think, before she could question, Daniel closed the space between them. His lips brushed against hers. It was soft, fleeting, as if testing the waters. But the moment it happened, Claire knew everything had changed. The next morning was cold. My mind was still filled with the events from the previous day. It was exactly 6 in the morning when it began to rain. The soft drizzle quickly turned into a heavy downpour, the kind that made everything outside look blurred and distant. I pulled my blanket tighter around me, hoping to find warmth, but my thoughts wouldn't let me rest. Then, without warning, my stepdad came into my room unannounced. "Claire, wake up," Daniel said, his voice softer than usual. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, startled by his presence. He rarely ever came into my room. I sat up, my heart beating a little faster. "There's a storm coming," he continued, his gaze flickering toward the window. "Power might go out. Thought you should know." I nodded slowly, but I could sense there was something else, something unspoken in the way he lingered at the door. That night, the storm arrived in full force. The rain pounded against the windows, the wind howling like something restless and wild. I sat curled up on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, as Daniel scrolled through the TV looking for a movie. The dim lighting made everything feel more intimate, more secretive. "Looks like we're stuck in for the night," he muttered, settling beside me. I nodded, hugging my knees. The house felt smaller, quieter, as if the storm outside had drawn a line between the world and us. Halfway through the movie, a loud clap of thunder crashed through the sky. Instinctively, I flinched, my body tensing. Without thinking, I shifted closer to Daniel, seeking warmth, comfort, something to steady me. He noticed. For a moment, he hesitated, then slowly, carefully, he draped an arm around my shoulders. It was meant to be reassuring, casual even. But the moment his arm settled around me, I felt it, his warmth, his presence. My heart pounded. I could hear the rain, the distant echoes of thunder, but nothing felt louder than the silence between us. I wasn't sure how long we sat like that, unmoving. The movie played on, but neither of us was really watching anymore. The air had changed. "This feels different," I murmured, barely recognizing my own voice. Daniel didn't reply right away. I felt him inhale deeply, his chest rising and falling beside me. "It does," he admitted finally. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. His eyes held something I couldn't quite place, hesitation, conflict, something deeper. Neither of us moved. Neither of us pulled away. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. Then we kissed. It was fast. I was the one making the moves this time around. He looked into my eyes and asked, "Are you sure about this?" I answered yes. That night we did it twice. The next day came rather too quickly. I wasn't sure when I had fallen asleep. The weight of the previous night still clung to me like an invisible thread, wrapping itself around my thoughts, refusing to let go. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the morning light peeked through my curtains. My heart felt heavy, my mind restless. I had spent the day avoiding Daniel. I told myself it was unintentional, but deep down, I knew better. The silence between us had become thick, filled with something we both understood but refused to name. I kept myself busy with meaningless distractions, scrolling through my phone, pretending to read, walking aimlessly through the house. But no matter what I did, my thoughts always circled back to him. To last night. to the way his arm had settled around me so naturally, to the way my body had responded before my mind could catch up. And I wasn't the only one affected. I caught glimpses of him throughout the day. In the kitchen, when he poured himself a cup of coffee but barely took a sip. In the hallway, when he paused as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. He felt it too, the change between us. The shift in something that had once been simple. By evening, the rain had returned. A soft drizzle at first, then heavier, drumming against the windows. I stood by the living room, watching as water pooled on the pavement outside. There was something mesmerizing about it, the endless rhythm, the way it washed over everything as if it could cleanse the world of its sins. I needed air. Without thinking, I stepped outside onto the porch. The wooden planks were cool beneath my bare feet, the scent of wet earth thick in the air. I wrapped my arms around myself, exhaling as I leaned against the railing. I wasn't alone for long. The screen door creaked open behind me, and I stiffened. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Daniel. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He simply stepped beside me, resting his hands against the railing as he gazed out into the rain. "It's peaceful out here," he said finally. His voice was low, almost careful. I nodded. "Yeah, it is." The quiet stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with things we weren't saying, thoughts we weren't ready to admit. Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't see much of you today." I forced a small smile. "I was just keeping busy." His gaze flickered toward me, searching. Avoiding me? I swallowed. Maybe. Honesty hung in the air between us. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. I wanted to say more, to explain the confusion twisting inside me, but the words wouldn't come. The rain grew heavier. The wind picked up slightly, sending a cool breeze across the porch. A shiver ran through me before I could stop it. Daniel noticed. Without hesitation, he reached out and wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. It was instinctive, effortless. I should have stepped away. I should have said something. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself sink into the warmth of his embrace. My head rested lightly against his chest, and I could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His body was warm, solid, grounding. I felt his fingers graze my arm, a barely there touch that sent shivers down my spine. My hands lingered on his back longer than they should have, fingers curling slightly against the fabric of his shirt. I felt him inhale sharply, just for a second, and I knew he felt it too. Slowly, I lifted my head. Our faces were inches apart now. The rain continued to fall, the sound of it surrounding us, but in that moment, it was like the rest of the world had faded away. It was just us. His eyes searched mine, hesitant yet unyielding. He was waiting for me to move, to step away, to break the moment before it became something more. But I didn't. A silent question hung between us, one neither of us dared to voice. Daniel's gaze flickered to my lips. And then it happened. A brief, hesitant kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was soft, filled with uncertainty and an unspoken longing. His lips were warm against mine, gentle yet firm. My breath caught in my throat, and for a fleeting second, I allowed myself to sink into it, to let go of logic, of the world, of everything except this. The second it was over, we both stepped back, breathless. Reality crashed in. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, as if he, too, was just realizing what had happened. His hand fell away from my arm, and I felt the absence of his touch immediately. "We shouldn't have," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. I nodded, my throat tight. "I know." But neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Because even though we both knew it was wrong, neither of us could deny what we felt. And that was the most dangerous part of all. 2 days later, Mom was back from her business trip. I was uneasy. I had spent the entire morning pretending I was fine. Pretending I wasn't drowning in guilt. Pretending that nothing had changed. But everything had. The moment I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway, my stomach twisted. My pulse quickened, my palms damp with nervous sweat. Daniel had been in his office most of the day, keeping his distance just as I had kept mine. We hadn't spoken about that night, not once. But we didn't have to. The silence between us said enough. The front door swung open, and my mother's familiar voice filled the house. "I'm home." She stepped inside, looking radiant as always, her suitcase in one hand, her phone in the other, already responding to messages. She barely glanced up as she set her things down, her energy still wrapped up in work and schedules. Daniel emerged from his office then, his face composed, unreadable. He smiled as he walked toward her, his arms opening for an embrace. "Welcome back," he said smoothly. She stepped into his arms, kissing him on the cheek, holding him for just a little too long. My throat tightened. I forced myself to smile, forced myself to act like nothing had happened. But inside, I felt sick. Mom turned to me next, pulling me into a hug. "Claire, sweetie, how have you been? You didn't burn the house down while I was gone, did you?" she teased. I let out a hollow laugh. "Nope. House is still standing." She grinned. "Good girl. I've missed you both so much. I have so many stories to tell you over dinner." Dinner. The thought of sitting at the same table, pretending that everything was normal, made my stomach turn. But I had no choice. That night, I sat through dinner in silence, nodding when necessary, forcing smiles when expected. Every time I looked at Daniel, he looked away. The weight of our secret sat between us like an invisible barrier, suffocating me. After dinner, I excused myself and went to my room, locking the door behind me. I pressed my hands against my stomach, my heart hammering in my chest. I was late. Panic clawed at my throat. I hadn't allowed myself to think about it before, hadn't let my mind go there. But now, the truth was undeniable. I was pregnant. And no one could ever know. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging content. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more captivating stories. What do you think about Claire's situation? Do you believe secrets like this can ever stay hidden, or do they always find a way to surface? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Was Claire's choice to keep the pregnancy a wise one, or should she have confessed? Let's discuss. Drop your opinions below, and stay tuned for the next story.